I was the only sibling banned from the family reunion, because they said I was a failure. 1 month later, they walked into a building with my name on it. If you've ever felt like the black sheep, if you've ever been written off by your own family just for chasing something they couldn't understand, then you already know how this story ends. But I want you to feel how it began. And if it stirs something in you, don't forget to subscribe to their family stories. Like the video, leave a comment, because chances are, you're not the only one who's been through it. And no one should carry that weight alone. Now let me take you back. I was raised in a house where silence was golden, and achievement was currency. My father, Richard Mitchell, was the kind of man who only smiled at report cards and trophies. My mother, the gatekeeper of appearances. We lived in Greystone County, North Carolina, where image meant everything. I was the youngest of 3. My brother Alan was the golden boy, now a heart surgeon in Charlotte. My sister Rebecca was the pride of the family, top of her class at Georgetown Law. And me? Well, I used to write poems in the margins of my math tests. From the very beginning, I knew I didn't belong in their world of spreadsheets and country club luncheons. I wanted different things. I wanted to help people who didn't have a voice. I wanted to work in shelters, uplift survivors, build something real. I still remember the night I told my parents I wanted to start a nonprofit for women recovering from abuse and homelessness. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother let out a soft laugh and said, "That's cute, Caroline, but it's not a career." That was their favorite phrase, "It's not a career." When I left my corporate job in Atlanta at 27, I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have investors. Just a dream. $7,200 in savings. And a few women who believed in me. I called the nonprofit Second Step, because everyone deserves one. I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would come around when they saw what I was doing. I emailed them photos from our first shelter ribbon cutting. No reply. I sent a letter the day we got our first grant. Nothing. Not even a "congrats." I became something they didn't talk about. They still invited me to Christmas, but I was always seated next to the coat rack. Like an afterthought, I learned to smile through it. I told myself that some people just can't love what they don't understand. And then came the email. It was from Rebecca. "We're hosting a family reunion for Dad's retirement. Saturday, February 11th. Please RSVP. No warmth. No, we'd love to see you. Just a bullet-pointed itinerary. But still, I responded. I said I'd love to come. That I'd bring Maya, my co-director and one of the fiercest women I know. We built Second Step together. She's more family to me than half the people on that list." The next morning, I got another email, this time from my mother. "Caroline, I think it's best if you don't attend. It's a formal affair and you know how these things go. Let's not make it uncomfortable, for anyone." I stared at those words for a long time. My hands were cold, even though the room wasn't. Let's not make it uncomfortable, for anyone. What they really meant was, you don't belong with us. You never did. I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I went to work. A few days later, during a strategy call, someone on our team mentioned a brand new shelter being funded by one of our university partners. It was going to be our biggest build yet. I wasn't paying full attention until they said the location. Greystone County. I sat up straight. "Wait," I said. "Where exactly in Greystone?" They gave the address. My old town. Just 2 miles from the house I grew up in. And then Maya looked at me across the table and said, "We should name it after you. Care, you built this from nothing. It's your legacy." I didn't speak. I just nodded slowly. The board approved it the following week. The Caroline Mitchell Center for Renewal. And the ribbon cutting? February 12th. 1 day after the reunion. I didn't tell my family. Not a word. Let them toast each other the night before. Let them think they'd erased me for good. Because the very next day, they were going to walk into a building with my name on it. I didn't sleep the night before the ribbon cutting. Not from nerves. No, it wasn't that kind of fear. It was something else, something quieter. Like I'd spent years building this moment out of the scraps of my own rejection. And now that it was finally here, I was afraid it wouldn't feel like justice. That maybe, deep down, I still wanted them to be proud of me. I arrived early. The building gleamed in the winter sun, 3 stories high. Clean lines, soft brick, big glass windows. It didn't look like a shelter. That was the point. We wanted it to feel like a beginning, not an ending. There were already chairs set up out front. A podium, a red velvet ribbon, photographers, university staff. A few women who'd come through our program stood near the doors, waiting to speak. Maya handed me a cup of tea and squeezed my shoulder. "They're coming," she said. And I knew exactly who she meant. I saw them before they saw me. My mother in her pressed wool coat. My father, grayer now, but still walking like he had somewhere important to be. Rebecca and Alan trailed behind, perfectly dressed. As always, they were talking to the dean, smiling like they were at a charity gala. I stayed out of view. I wanted the building to speak first. They mingled, oblivious, sipping cider from paper cups. Then the MC stepped up to the mic and welcomed everyone, said a few words about the importance of second chances. Then he pointed to the banner that covered the main signage. "And now," he said, "it is my great honor to reveal the name of this new chapter for our community." He nodded to the volunteer. She pulled the rope. There it was, in bold lettering against white stone. The Caroline Mitchell Center for Renewal. For a moment, everything froze. I saw my father blink twice. My mother's jaw actually dropped. Alan whispered something to Rebecca, who stared at the sign like it was written in a foreign language. Then the MC said, "Please welcome our keynote speaker, our founder, and the woman whose vision made this place possible, Miss Caroline Mitchell." I stepped forward. The crowd clapped. Some stood. I saw a few of the women from our other shelters wipe their eyes. Maya gave me a proud, knowing nod, but all I saw, standing in the back, was my family. No one clapped. They just stared. I took the podium, adjusted the mic. My voice didn't shake. "When I left Greystone 11 years ago, I began. I didn't think I'd ever come back. I left behind a family who didn't understand me, and a town that didn't make space for people like the ones we help today. But I also left with something powerful, a dream. A belief that no one is ever truly lost. That healing is always possible." I glanced up. My mother's lips were tight. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. I continued. "This center isn't just a building. It's a promise. To every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. To everyone who's been turned away, dismissed, or forgotten. This place says, you matter. You always did." I stepped down. More applause. Some standing. I didn't look back. As I walked toward the building, someone called my name. It was Rebecca. She was walking fast, heels clicking on the pavement, eyes wide. "Caroline," she said, breathless. "Why didn't you tell us?" I paused. Would it have changed anything? She didn't answer. Then my mother came up behind her. "You should have told us you were involved," she said. Her tone was sharp, but her hands trembled. We could have supported this." I looked her in the eyes. "You told me not to come to the reunion." She flinched, just slightly, then tried to recover. "We didn't want to make things uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," I said. "Not anymore." She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. My father was silent. He stood a few feet back, arms crossed. He hadn't moved once. I turned to go. Rebecca reached out and touched my arm. "You know," she said softly, "Dad was proud of you. He just didn't know how to say it." I nodded. "I used to want to hear that so badly," I said. "But today, I don't need it." I walked into the building alone. Past the new front desk. Past the freshly painted walls. Into the quiet of a future I built with my own 2 hands. I didn't need their permission to be proud. And I didn't need the reunion. I needed to reunite with myself. After the ceremony, I stayed behind while most people filtered out. The media took their shots. A few donors shook my hand. But the crowd was thinning. And the buzz that had filled the air just an hour earlier now gave way to quiet footsteps and rustling programs. I wandered the halls of the center, my heels clicking on the freshly polished floors. The rooms still smelled like new paint and lavender cleaner. Staff had already begun settling in, placing files in drawers, unpacking boxes of hygiene kits and welcome folders. One of the women I'd worked with early on. Lena waved at me from the doorway of the intake room. She used to sleep under a bridge. Now, she was our intake coordinator. I smiled and kept walking. Down the main corridor, just past the community kitchen, hung a series of framed photographs, portraits of the women whose lives had been changed through Second Step. No glossy headshots, just honest, raw images. Some were smiling, some weren't, but they all looked awake. I stopped in front of one. Her name was Tanya. She'd survived a 10-year abusive marriage. Walked barefoot into one of our Georgia shelters, carrying a toddler in one arm and a trash bag in the other. Now, she was halfway through a nursing degree. I touched the edge of the frame. And for a moment, I forgot about the email. The reunion, the staring faces. This wall, these women, this was my real family. Still, as I made my way back toward the lobby, I couldn't help but think about what had happened outside. The look in my sister's eyes. My mother's trembling hands. The silence from my father. That silence had always been the loudest thing in our house. I stepped out into the sunlight. The event tents were being folded. The parking lot mostly empty. I thought they were gone. But I was wrong. My father was standing near the side of the building. Alone. Hands in his coat pockets. Eyes fixed on the stone plaque bearing my name. I hesitated. For a second, I thought about turning back. Letting him walk away like he always did. But something in me said, no, go face it. So I did. He didn't look at me when I approached. Just nodded once, still staring at the wall. It's a good building, he said. Thank you. You really did all this? I did, I said, with help. But yeah. Another long silence. I didn't know, he said finally. Not the extent of it. You didn't ask. That hit him harder than I expected. His lips pressed into a thin line. You were always different, he said. I know. You wanted things that didn't make sense to the rest of us. I didn't need them to make sense. I replied. I just needed you to care. He looked down then, scuffed his shoe against the sidewalk. I suppose we were wrong. All of us. I didn't say anything. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his face that wasn't control or calculation. It was discomfort, regret, maybe, but not enough to call it apology. Still, it was something. You're doing good work, he said. Important work. I gave him a small nod. I know. He sighed, looked at the cars lined up along the street. We'll be heading out soon. Back home. Safe travels, I said. He glanced back at the building. You named it after yourself. I didn't, I said. The board did. Another pause. Still, I guess that means it's permanent. I looked him dead in the eye. That's the idea. For a moment, he looked like he might say more. But he didn't. He just nodded once, then walked away. No hug, no final word, just his back retreating into the slow silence of an empty lot. And I let him go. Because I finally understood. Not every story needs a happy ending to be complete. Some just need an ending. A full stop. I stayed until the sun dipped low. Watched the shadows stretch long across the brick. And for the first time in a long time, I felt still. Not waiting. Not proving. Just existing. Whole. That night, back in my apartment in Atlanta, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the half-drunk cup of tea I'd left there that morning. I hadn't turned the lights on. The room was dim, washed in that faint blue glow that only comes just after sunset. It was quiet, too quiet, maybe, but not the lonely kind. Just still. My phone buzzed once. A message from Maya. You were brilliant today. Proud of you. Sleep well. I smiled. Then I noticed something else. An email. From my mother. Subject line. Today. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. Heart slow and steady. Then I opened it. Caroline. I didn't know the center was yours. It was. Impressive. You've done a lot with your life. I'm sorry we haven't always made that clear. Your father was quiet on the drive home. That usually means he's thinking. That's something. At least. Rebecca wants to talk. I do too. Maybe next week? Lunch? You choose the place. Love. Mom. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it was warm, it wasn't, but because it was something. A crack in the wall. A hesitation in the pattern. My mother had never apologized in her life. Not really. But this wasn't an apology. Not exactly. It was an invitation. Tentative, measured, still laced with her careful pride. But it was more than I'd ever gotten. I didn't reply. Not that night. I stood, stretched, and walked toward the window. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly. The wind blew gently through the trees. And I could just barely make out the headlights of a car moving slowly through the neighborhood. Life. Ordinary and uninterrupted. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had nothing to prove. The next morning, I went into the office early. The staff had already filled the main room, typing away, laughing, sipping coffee. The women we helped were coming in for orientation. New faces, new stories. I greeted them one by one, handed out folders, pointed them toward the break room. One young woman, barely 20, paused when she saw me. "You're her, right?" she said, eyes wide. "The one from the news? Caroline?" I smiled gently. "That's me." She clutched her folder to her chest. I've been to a lot of places. This one feels different. Safer. My throat tightened. "I'm glad." She nodded, and something about the way she walked away, shoulders slightly lifted, as if her body had been carrying the weight of years, made me feel more grounded than any trophy or praise ever could. Maya walked in a few minutes later, holding 2 coffees. She handed me one and leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" she asked. "I think I am," I said. Finally. We stood there for a bit, not speaking, just watching the room, the small hum of voices, the smell of brewed coffee, the sound of a woman laughing for what might have been the first time in months. Later that afternoon, Rebecca called. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Hey," she said, cautious. "Do you have a minute?" "I do," I said, voice calm. I don't even know where to begin." "You already have." Another pause. "I was wrong about you," she said. "We all were. I thought you were running away from responsibility. But you were running towards something. Something bigger than any of us." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to make sure I wasn't speaking from old wounds. "You don't have to explain it, Rebecca," I said. "I'm not angry anymore. Just tired of trying to be understood by people who never really wanted to understand me." "I understand you now," she said quietly. "I hope that's true," I said. "But even if it's not, I'm okay." She didn't cry, but her voice caught at the end when she said, "I'm proud of you." It landed differently than I expected. Softer. Not because I needed to hear it, but because I no longer needed to chase it. I thanked her. We said goodbye. Nothing dramatic. No grand reunion or emotional fanfare. Just 2 sisters, starting the slow work of becoming something new. That night, I opened my mother's email again. I reread it once, then hit reply. "Next week works. There's a little cafe off Ponce de Leon Avenue. Quiet, good soup. I'll see you Tuesday at noon. Caroline." And with that, I closed the laptop, exhaled, and walked away. Some things, it turns out, don't need to be fixed. They just need to be faced. And once you do, you stop carrying them. You finally let them down. You finally stand up straight. The following Tuesday came with gray skies and the promise of rain. I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. It was one of those small, cozy spots tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, low ceilings, wood-paneled walls, a row of mismatched chairs, and the smell of lentil soup that clung to your sweater long after you left. I picked a table near the window, ordered a chamomile tea. It had been years since my mother and I had sat across from each other in a public place without the buffer of a holiday or a family obligation. The last time we met for lunch, I was 26 and still working corporate. I remember she spent most of it listing friends' daughters who were doing better in life. I nodded politely then. I didn't challenge her. I just folded myself into the shape she preferred and disappeared into my silence. This time, I promised myself I wouldn't do that. The bell above the door jingled. She walked in, brisk and elegant in her tailored coat, pearls tucked neatly at her collar. For a moment, I felt like a teenager again, wanting to impress her. Afraid I wouldn't, but the feeling passed. She spotted me and offered a small, hesitant smile. I stood. We exchanged a quick hug. The kind that's more about contact than closeness. She sat, folded her napkin, adjusted her purse beside her. You look well, she said. Thanks. You too. There was a pause. She looked around. Charming little place. Very rustic. It's been here a while. No one rushes you out. She nodded slowly. That's rare these days. The waiter came by. She ordered soup. I stuck with my tea. After he left, she cleared her throat. I owe you an apology, Caroline. I looked at her, waiting. For what exactly? She flinched. Just slightly. For being so dismissive. For not seeing what you were trying to do. We were wrong. I was wrong. I let that sit in the air for a while. It didn't come easily to her. I could see the effort it took. I didn't need you to believe in the work, I said, but I needed you to believe in me. I see that now. She looked down at her hands, turning her wedding band with her thumb. Your father hasn't stopped talking about the center. She added. He won't say it, but he's proud. We both are. Funny, I said quietly. I spent years trying to earn that. Now that I have it, I'm not sure what to do with it. She met my eyes. You don't have to do anything with it. Just know that it's real. I wasn't sure I believed her, but I appreciated the gesture. We sat in silence for a while. The soup came. She sipped it delicately, commenting on the seasoning, avoiding the harder parts of the conversation. I let her. Not everything had to be unpacked all at once. Some things, especially between mothers and daughters, are best approached like old wallpaper, peeled back slowly, one layer at a time. When the check came, she reached for it. I didn't stop her. As we stood to leave, she turned to me at the door. Would you ever come home? Just to visit. I think the family would like to see you again. I tilted my head slightly. Would they? Or would it just make them uncomfortable? Her mouth tightened, then softened. Maybe both, she said, but I'd still like you there. I'll think about it. She reached for my hand, held it longer than she used to. Outside, the rain had started. She opened her umbrella. I watched her walk away down the street, small and sharp against the gray backdrop of the city. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just felt clean. Later that night, I pulled out a cardboard box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old letters I never sent, photos from our first shelter, a scarf my mother knitted me when I was 15. I held it in my hands and wondered who we could have been if love had been shown differently. But I didn't linger in the what-ifs. I set the scarf aside, pulled out a journal, and started writing. Not for the world, not for work, just for myself. There was still healing left to do. But the wound was no longer bleeding. It was just a scar now. And even scars, I've learned, can be beautiful. Spring came early that year. Atlanta was already wearing her green, trees blooming pink and white along the sidewalks. And the soft hum of lawnmowers filled the mornings. I started walking more, mornings mostly, before the phones started ringing. Before the inbox flooded, just me, the sound of my shoes on pavement, and the quiet company of. There's a certain calm that settles in after you've survived your own heartbreak. It's not joy, not yet. It's more like clarity, a low burning peace. The center in Greystone opened to full capacity within 6 weeks. The waitlist grew quickly. I wasn't surprised. That town had always known how to hide its broken things under polished church steps and manicured lawns. But the pain was there, quiet, tucked inside bedrooms and I visited twice more in the following months. Once for a donor tour. Once to meet with local therapists we were bringing on staff. Both times, I walked through the front doors under that stone plaque bearing my name and felt no trace of the old ache. The third time I went, I didn't tell anyone. I just showed up, slipped in through the back, and sat quietly in the common room during a morning circle. The women didn't know who I was, just that I was a guest. And guests didn't talk unless invited. A woman named Carla shared her story that morning. 32, 2 kids. She said she used to think her silence was safer than her truth. But now, sitting in that circle, she was starting to believe that maybe telling the truth was how you set yourself free. I nodded without thinking. And when she glanced at me, she smiled like we understood something together, without ever having to name it. Later that day, I got a message from Rebecca. Just a short note. Mom's been bringing you up a lot lately. More than usual. I think she's trying. In her own way. I read it once, then deleted it. Not out of anger. Just. I didn't need to archive her effort. Some things don't need to be stored. They just need to happen. A few days later, Maya and I sat on the rooftop of our office building, watching the sun dip behind the Atlanta skyline. She passed me a soda. Her shoes kicked off, legs curled beneath her. You ever think about taking a break? She asked. I laughed softly. Every other Friday. I'm serious. You've been going non-stop for over a decade. We've got a strong staff now. Systems are in place. You built this. Care. Maybe it's time to rest a little. Rest. The word felt unfamiliar in my mouth. I wouldn't even know how. Maya grinned. Then start small. Take a weekend. Go somewhere. Do nothing. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because she wasn't wrong. That night, I pulled out an old photo album. One of the few things I'd brought with me from my parents' house. Most of the photos were brittle with age. Corners curled, edges faded. I flipped through images of birthdays, church picnics, school plays. In every picture, I was on the edge of the frame. Always near, but never quite the center. Then I turned to a page I hadn't seen in years. It was from a summer trip to the mountains. I was maybe 12. In that photo, I was laughing, really laughing, arms wide, face tilted up to the sun. No tension in my shoulders. No fear of being seen. I stared at that girl a long time. And I whispered, "You made it." The next morning, I booked a cabin in North Georgia. Just me, a bag of books, and a promise to keep the phone off for 3 days. I told no one, not even Maya. I drove out of the city before sunrise. The roads were empty, the sky barely awake. Somewhere around mile marker 78, I rolled the windows down and let the wind tangle my hair. There was a freedom in that moment I hadn't felt in years. When I arrived, the cabin was quiet, tucked deep in the woods. I unpacked slowly, made tea, and sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. There were no meetings, no speeches, no one calling my name. Just birdsong, just the hush of trees. Just me. And that was enough. The first night at the cabin, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was unsettled, just unused to the stillness. There were no cars rushing past. No buzzing streetlights outside the window. No late-night emails lighting up my phone. Just wind brushing against pine needles. And the soft creak of old wood breathing in the night air. I lay there with the window cracked open and listened. It reminded me of being a child again. Before the weight of expectations settled on my chest like wet wool. Before I learned how to shrink my voice to fit the spaces I was allowed. At sunrise, I stepped outside barefoot. The porch boards were cold and damp with dew. A deer moved slowly between the trees. Graceful and unaware of me. I stood still and watched until it disappeared. I made coffee and curled up in the porch swing with a blanket, letting the mug warm my hands. My mind should have been racing with everything I had waiting back in Atlanta, deadlines, budgets, calls, but instead, it was quiet, like someone had finally turned down the volume in my head. Mid-morning, I pulled out a blank journal. I hadn't written by hand in a long time. Not for myself. Anyway, everything had been memos, strategy drafts, proposals. But this was different. I didn't write for anyone's eyes but my own. The first sentence surprised me. I forgive you. I didn't write who it was for. Maybe it was meant for them, my parents, my siblings, maybe for myself, maybe for the girl I used to be who spent so long trying to be heard in a house that only listened to its own echo. Either way, it felt like truth. The rest of the day passed slowly. I hiked the trail behind the cabin, found a patch of wild violets blooming near a stream, and sat beside them for what must have been an hour. I didn't take pictures. I didn't post anything. I just watched the water move over smooth stones and thought about how many things in life we try to force when, really, they're already flowing the way they need to. That night, I built a fire. The wood cracked and hissed as it caught, the flames dancing low and golden. I sat cross-legged in front of it with another cup of tea and thought about all the times I'd burned myself trying to hold onto things that weren't meant for me. I thought about the reunion. I thought about the silence afterward. There was a time I would have carried it around like a stone in my coat pocket. Heavy and familiar. But now, I let it burn. Right there with the splinters and the kindling. I let it burn until there was nothing left but glowing coals and the sound of my own breath. On the second morning, I woke before dawn. There was a fog hanging low over the trees. Like the whole world was still asleep. I made oatmeal on the stove, wrapped myself in a shawl, and stood on the back deck watching the mist rise. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was softer than that. A kind of quiet knowing. Like I had come through something. Weathered a storm so slow and steady. I hadn't even noticed it was shaping me. And now, on the other side, I could finally feel the sun on my skin again. Before I left, I carved something into the edge of the porch rail with my keys. Just 2 words. Still here. No one would see it. But I would know. I packed my bags, locked the cabin, and drove home with the windows down. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth. And somewhere around the county line, I began to hum. Not a song I knew. Just something my body made up. Simple and light, like breath given shape. Back in the city, life resumed. The phones rang again. The inbox filled. The center stayed busy. The world didn't pause just because I did. But I was different. Not louder, not tougher, just more certain. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their invitations. I didn't even need their approval. I had built something out of nothing. I had poured hope into brick and mortar. And whether they came to see it or not, it stood, with my name on it. And that, after everything, was enough. A few weeks after I returned from the cabin, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. An actual handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. With my mother's cursive on the envelope. That alone made my hands pause before opening it. It was short, careful, the way she always was when anything real threatened to rise to the surface. But it was more personal than anything she'd written before. Caroline, I walked through the center last week. Alone. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I just needed to see it. Needed to see you. In it. Every wall. Every room. It felt like you. Not the version of you we tried to shape. But the one we never really understood. You made something good. Something lasting. And I hope, if you'll let me, I can come to know that version of you a little better. Love. Mom. I folded the letter and sat with it for a while. The sunlight crept in across the table. Outside, someone was trimming hedges, and the rhythmic clatter of the trimmer broke up the silence. I didn't cry. I just felt something shift inside. Like a window had cracked open that had been painted shut for years. That Sunday, I called Rebecca. She was in the middle of preparing a roast, chopping carrots. Distracted, but when she realized it was me, her voice brightened. Hey, stranger, she said. Didn't think I'd hear from you so soon. I didn't ease into it. I got a letter from Mom. Oh, she said, quieter now. I told her to write. She wasn't sure you'd read it. I read it. Another pause. Then, so what now? I let the question settle before answering. I'm not sure. Maybe nothing. Maybe lunch again. Or a phone call once in a while. But if it's going to happen, it has to be slow. No pretending like everything's healed when it's not. I get that, she said. I think she's just realizing time's not endless anymore. I think we all are. She hesitated. You know, I look at the photo of the center in the newspaper and still can't believe it. I mean, I knew you were working hard. But I had no idea. I feel like I missed the whole story. You did, I said gently. But it's not over. We stayed on the phone a little longer. Talked about her kids, her work. She told me Alan had been asking about me. That he was the only one who didn't attend the ribbon cutting and was starting to regret it. That didn't surprise me. Alan had always been the type who didn't show up unless there was something in it for him. But maybe even he was starting to realize that some things you miss don't circle back. A few days later, I was walking down a grocery store aisle when a woman tapped me on the shoulder. Mid-50s, warm smile, eyes that had seen things. You're Caroline Mitchell, aren't you? She asked. I nodded. Yes. She pressed her hand to her chest. I just wanted to say thank you. My niece is at your center in Greystone. She says it's the first place she's ever felt human again. I didn't know what to say. I reached out, touched her hand, and said, that means more than you know. After she walked away, I stood there between the pasta and canned soup and let the weight of it settle. This was what it was all for. Not the applause, not the articles, just that. One woman. One niece. One life made softer because I didn't give up. That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in the same shawl I'd taken to the cabin. The air had that spring sweetness in it, jasmine or honeysuckle. I could never tell the difference. I thought about how far I'd come. From the girl who used to eat dinner in silence at the edge of the table. From the young woman who left town with nothing but a used laptop and a stubborn dream. From the outsider who wasn't invited to her own father's celebration. And now, I was something else entirely. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I didn't carry that sharp ache in my ribs every time the phone didn't ring on my birthday. I had my own family now. Not bound by blood, but built by choice. Women who knew me, loved me, needed me. And finally, after all these years, I needed no one's permission to take up space. To speak. To be seen. Sometimes, people don't realize they've erased you until your name is carved in stone. And by then, you've already made peace with their silence. I didn't know the exact moment the sadness left me. It wasn't loud. There was no epiphany, no dramatic shift, no one walking in to hold me and say, you're enough now. It just faded, like morning fog, like the final note of a sorrowful song that had played too long. One morning, I simply woke up and realized, I didn't need to be seen anymore. Because I had seen myself. Clearly, fully, and that was enough. My apartment hadn't changed. The same quiet walls. The same framed photos of the women I'd walked beside. Notes taped above my desk in their handwriting. None of them were there to remind me of how much I had done. They reminded me why I had done it. On a soft Saturday afternoon, I stood at the kitchen counter peeling apples for a simple pot of soup. Sunlight came through the window, casting long, gentle lines across the floor. There was peace in the small things. In the scrape of a knife on apple skin. In the faint jazz humming from the old radio. In knowing no one was waiting on me to perform. No one was keeping score. I was no longer trying to earn a place at a table that had never been set for me. And I wasn't angry anymore. I had built my own table. I had pulled up chairs for women no one else would welcome. I didn't need anyone to clap for me. The lives changed. That was the applause. The silence that used to ache in my chest now lived inside me like a still lake, deep. Cool, undisturbed. I stepped outside as the soup simmered and watched a bird land on the railing. Feathers ruffled by the breeze. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't try to capture the moment. I let it be. Because that's what I had become. Not a moment to impress. Or explain. Or justify. Just a life. Quietly. Fully lived. And if there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that sometimes, the people who erased you will have to walk into a building with your name on it. But by the time they do, you'll have already reclaimed yourself. And that reunion, the one with you, is the one that matters most.